Welcome, everybody. My name is Sean O'Connor, and I'll be talking about kind of the journey from going from being a developer to a manager, right? I guess it's worth mentioning my current title, God, I hate titles, but they have uses, is Director of Application Engineering at Bitly. Long story short, I manage people, and I manage one other person who manages other people who build things. Good times. And something that sometimes comes up when I give talks is people hear the name Bitly and they get a little confused. Particularly, why do I care about this person? Right? Because like Bitly, they do short links, right? Like how hard can that be, right? Just out of curiosity, who here's heard of Bitly? Awesome, almost every hand in the room. Who here's used Bitly? Still pretty good. Who here has any idea how we make money or how we possibly have an actual business based on this? Right, not even my coworker has her hand up. There we go. Nice. So normally at this point, I'd be going into talking about like all the billions of clicks that we handle and all of our servers and all the hard technical problems we're dealing with. The short answer to the business question is we have a paid product that does branding analytics. It's good times. The thing that's actually more interesting to this talk, though, is this picture. Right, so this was from a coffee company event this last summer. At that time, the company was about 65 people. Now I think we're about 80, right? So that gets to some interesting problems, right? That's when you start getting big enough where just having a flat org where everybody does whatever maybe is not super efficient anymore. But you're also not going to have just an established structure that you're working within, right? You're everybody's figuring it out as you go. It's also interesting that we are profitable-ish. Basically, we're in a place where we can be as profitable as we want. It's always just balancing investment versus money. And we're growing, right? So I have 2 open headcounts on my team, I think. Basically, every team has a bunch of open headcounts, and it's interesting. So how did we get here, right? So what was this journey? So about 3 years ago, I started at Bitly. I was just coding, right? I was working, full-time, writing code, building things. It was good, I like coding. It's a good time, you just get stuff done. You can just come in, do your stuff, and go. You're great. Some days things got a little bit more complicated, but you deal. It's good. And then I kind of took like the first half step towards being more of a manager. I started doing some mentorship, right? So the time I joined Bitly, I was, a bit more senior. I had experience in my career. I also generally enjoy teaching and enjoy kind of providing feedback to others. So I started giving some guidance to mentorship to more junior people on my team, working with some of the people on our data science team to help them kind of understand the differences of whatever crazy things they can do on their standalone Hadoop cluster and what we can do in production systems, things like that. And then about a year in, there was a bit of a management shuffle, as will happen. And as will happen in that kind of exercise, as basically one of the more senior engineers on the team was somewhat naturally in a bit of a leadership role, I was presented with a choice, right? Because basically, my boss and the CEO, basically everybody who was above me had left. For good reasons, actually, and it worked out well. But still, I was in a position where there was some new leadership coming in. I was presented with a choice of whether or not I wanted to basically manage the team that I had been acting on. And this brings us to our first lesson of the day, is that becoming a manager is a choice, right? And there's kind of 2 sides to this. I'm going to dig in a lot more on kind of the why you need to treat this as a choice and what you need to think about in regard to that. But something else that's worth highlighting here is if you're in a position where you're made a manager and it wasn't a choice, and you maybe think things would go poorly if you said no to becoming a manager, that might be a sign you might want to start looking for a new job. Obviously, it's hard and situations are different, but if you're not presented with the transition to management as a choice, as we'll get into for lots of reasons, that's a big red flag for the health of your culture in your company. So, something to think about there. Anyway, so that's one side, bit of a cautionary tale. But you should think about becoming a manager choice, right? And there's a bunch of reasons why you need to think about this. On kind of like the surface day-to-day level, right? The things that you're dealing with every day are going to be completely different, right? Instead of dealing with the ultimately pedantic but predictable computers, you're dealing with soft, fuzzy human problems. And as much as the people on your team may be pedantic, they're still humans, they're still fuzzy, and they're kind of harder to predict. You need to be much more deliberate in your interactions with other people, right? Other people in the team and other people in the org are going to be looking up to you. So you have to, everything you do has more impact. So you have to be more intentional, more deliberate about it. You're going to be doing less of this, right? If you're, as we'll get into, right? If you're really a full-time manager, and you're spending your day coding, you're spending the day not doing your job, right? That's a thing you have to consider. To kind of put a finer point on that, if you use GitHub, you're probably familiar with this graph. It's like a visualization of like your commit activity. This is the private one that includes my Bitly commit activity. If you look at this summer, there's a whole lot of white there. There are entire weeks where I did not commit code. And for me, that's okay, and that's probably a sign that I'm actually doing my job. But it's a thing. I know I'm hearing a bit of a buzz in the audio. Is that bothering anybody, or I don't know if there's anything we can. Anyway, right. So there's a career change, and it's going to be different day to day. Beyond that, there's also some bigger picture stuff that's going to change, and that you should make a conscious choice to go towards. Right. You're going to develop different skills, right? You're both the core skills that you need to do your job every day are fundamentally different, as well as accordingly, those are also going to be the skills you need to develop and invest time and energy in going forward, right? You have to learn about people and relationships and organizations and less of the tech, right? Given the people in this room, you'll probably be managing a technical team, so you still have to care about the tech and know about some of the tech, but it's not going to be your core competency anymore. What's important for you is going to change, right? Both in terms of what's important for you to get done today, and in terms of what's important for you career-wise, right? Well, again, everything switches from writing code and building stuff to making sure people are effective, making sure people are happy, and make sure the organization is healthy, right? And accordingly, your goals will be changed, right? And how you're measured will be changed. At Bitly, we do 6 months reviews, right? We do a self-eval, manager evals, peer feedback. When I was on the plane here, I was actually writing my self-eval and looking at my last evaluation. And on both of those, there's nothing about anything coding or technical, period, right? Because it's not my job anymore, right? My job is much more, again, people and organization. So that's a thing. And something I actually realized about a year into this, just kind of had one of those like, oh, wow, I had not thought of that moments. Is your next job hunt is going to look really different, right? When you're both the literal, like practical, what your interview is going to look like is going to be different. How you're going to be evaluated is going to be different. Additionally, if you think about like what the job market looks like, assuming that you want to stay in management, think about like how many engineers a company is going to be hiring at any point, and how many managers they're going to be hiring at any given point. Assuming they're a healthy organization, the latter one's going to be a lot smaller number. And the time windows are going to be different, right? So all that's going to be a very different beast. And none of this is inherently bad, but it's all going to be different, and you should think about if this is what you want, right? So that leads us to the question of like, so how do we think about this, right? Like that I just listed off half a dozen things to think about. That seems like a lot to try and reason about and get into any kind of cohesive decision making. And the advice that I got at the time when I first became a manager, and that has really resonated for me, is at the end of the day, you need to think about what makes you happy, right? What it is that about the job that you love. Yeah, these are great. By the way, at Bitly, we basically communicate in GIFs. The entire email threads that are these, so we got a lot of practice. Right, but what is it about your job that you love? What is it that gets you up in the morning? What gets you coming in when you're not feeling great and you've had a hard week? What keeps you going? Right? For me personally, it's building products that make people better at doing their jobs. Right? And accordingly, coding was just a means to an end. Right? It's something that I find some amount of intellectual reward on its own, but it's not it's not the end itself, it's a means. Accordingly, managing people is another means to that end. On the other hand, if you're a language geek and like learning about new languages and doing language design is like what really gets you motivated, maybe management's not going to be the most satisfying path for you to go down. right? So think about what you love and what makes you motivated, and then along all those dimensions, and think about, is management going to be the right choice for you? And also remember that might change over time. If it's maybe today is not the right choice for you, but maybe in 5 years it will be, because people change. So becoming a manager choice. So let's say we make the choice to become a manager, because otherwise this talk would be done and the narrative would be pointless. So now what, right? So we're on board, but what are we going to do, right? And it comes down to shifting gears, right? How do we actually make the transition from being somebody who does this all day, right? Somebody who sits around and codes and types, to somebody who deals with this, right? Taking a group of people who are nervous about the future and don't know what's going on and don't know what your deal is, to a group of people who are excited to come to work every day and love what they do, right? Take a group of people who perhaps maybe are not the most coordinated at the moment, and turn them into people who kick ass and take names, right? So that's what you need to get done, right? But when you start thinking about like practically, especially like I remember when basically like first week of trying to make this transition, you can kind of end up just sitting in a corner shaking like, I don't know how any of this works. People are weird, man. But the thing that made it okay for me, especially being somebody coming from a liberal arts school where presumably the thing they teach you is how to learn, is that management is a learnable skill. Slides go. There we go. Management is a learnable skill, right? And this is something that made the prospect of making this transition way easier for me, right? Because I know how to learn. I know how to teach myself. Therefore, if this is a learnable skill, it's something I can figure out, right? Of course, like any other skill, there's certain innate traits that you may have that may make you better suited for something or not. But at the end of the day, you can learn and you can get better. It's great. And just like anything that you can learn, there's a bunch of ways that you can go about doing it. One of the ways is experience, right? So doing more management gets you a better manager, usually. But even when you're starting out, you're not starting at zero, right? Presumably at some point in your career, you've had a boss. Probably have had a few at the point that you're potentially becoming a manager. And you think about it, like, so who here has ever had an awesome boss that they really loved, right? A bunch of people. Who here has had a horrible boss that made them quit their job? Right, almost everybody. Even though you weren't the one doing the managing, you can probably look back at how various situations were handled and see what went well and what didn't, right? Obviously, there's always going to be translation, and particular situations are different. But that's already a body of experience that you can draw from and apply towards your new challenges. Next thing that's great about learning skills is knowledge, right? It turns out that you are not the first person to manage other human beings. This is something that, as far as we can tell, has been done for at least 10,000 years, and probably was happening before that. We just didn't know how to write it down yet, right? Accordingly, some people have figured out things about managing people that's pretty universal and consistent, as well as some things that are specific to engineering and the types of humans that tend to do engineering stuff, and have written it down, so you can now read it and learn from it. It's great. I'll get into some more specific resources later, but a great starting place is this guy Rand's, Michael Lopp. His blog has continually great stuff. It's a pretty good balance of general management advice and kind of tech industry and engineering specific stuff. The first URL is kind of like hey, here of all the blog posts I've written, if you're just getting started, check these out. There's also a book he's written, again, kind of managing for engineers. Would give the caveat, if you're a literally brand new engineer, this has some like 201 level stuff in it that you might need to skip and maybe try not to implement on day 2, but still super good. I'll have some more resources later beyond that. So again, we're learning, we have experience, we have books and traditional resources to learn from. Additionally, we have mentors, right? We have people in our lives that have been doing this longer than us that we can talk to and get advice from. Something that has kept me around at Bitly for a long time. I've been there for about 3 years, which in internet years is almost forever. And part of why I've been there so long is I've had good mentors. I've had good support as a manager. So seek that out. So management's a learnable skill. Cool. All right. So we're in a place. We've started to make the transition. Things are going okay. And, things we're chilling. But let's assume that we have a bit of ambition and we want to do better than just okay. We we want to keep growing, and we want to keep doing better. So we need to start thinking about how do we kind of think about this at the next level. As Mark, our CEO, tends to say, how do we play chess, not checkers, right? How do we develop the game? And the thing that's necessary to start thinking about things at the next level as a manager is realizing that management is entirely about relationships, right? At the end of the day, that's fundamentally what management is about. Accordingly, it's really helpful to think about how do you build relationships and how do you kind of manage them, right? And just like any other relationship in your life, at the end of the day, it's about trust, right? If there isn't trust, there can't be a healthy relationship. That just doesn't work, right? Like if you don't trust the people on your team and or the people on your team don't trust you, that is something you need to fix today, because otherwise things are not going to end well. And when we think about trust, right, just like in any other relationship, there are ways we can go about building trust, right? There's specific things that we can look at and make sure that are working well, that as they execute well over time, trust will develop. One of the biggest ones is communication, right? Kind of just following kind of your dependency chain, if you will, right? If you can't communicate with somebody, it's going to be real hard to build trust, right? And this is, it's also worth mentioning, I kind of skipped here, the relationships that you need to build and maintain and manage as a manager are absolutely between you and your reports and the people on your team, but it's also with lots of other people within your organization, likely, right? So it's presumably you have some kind of boss, whether that's an individual person or a board or whatever, right? You have somebody to answer to. That's a relationship you need to manage. You probably have some kind of peers within the organization that you have to coordinate with. Those are relationships. And you probably have various other kind of people that you need to deal with. So keep it up. So communicate, right? One particular form of communication that is super important, at least in my belief, is having one-on-ones, right? Having time every single week on the calendar where you and at a minimum your reports, if not additionally your kind of high contact peers or managers, sit down and talk, right? Some weeks you might be talking about like long-term career stuff. Sometimes you might be talking about like the weather. Doesn't matter, right? But by having a regular cadence of like, hey, we're going to go in a room and talk every week because, right, it just has this default open channel of communication. This can feel really rough and time-consuming, but from my perspective, it's one of those things where if you don't have that level of open communication and touch with your team, there's no way you can really know what's going on, and therefore, how can you do your job as a manager, right? So, like, if you say you don't have time for one-on-ones every week, I question what you're spending your time on. So think about that, make that happen. Something else that's critical to solid communication is empathy, right? Again, if you just sit in a room and talk at each other, it's probably not going to be overly productive or helpful for anybody. Additionally, if this is additionally challenging for managers as you kind of move along in the process, right? So when you first make the transition from developer to manager, you still are probably in the developer mindset as far as like what you're doing every day, how you think about problems, what level of detail you're thinking about stuff. But as time goes on, you're going to kind of transition into a different mindset and a different context. And if you can't have the empathy to switch back into that developer context when you're speaking to, let's say, your reports, it's going to be really hard to communicate to them, right? I guarantee you, if you don't make that translation, 30+% of what they're saying is going to seem like an inscrutable insanity, right? And it's just because it's coming from a different place, right? So you have to be able to put yourself in that other person's shoes to understand what they're trying to say, so then you can act upon it, right? And that's kind of gets to the next thing in planning, right? There's a certain amount of trust you can build just between talking to people and organically, opportunistically doing stuff, right? Because trust has two sides, right? You need to be able to communicate with somebody to understand what they need and what they want and how you can help them. But there also has to be action, right? If you just listen but never do anything, people aren't going to trust you over time, right? But doing things, especially within an organization, usually requires time and coordination and isn't just going to happen, right? So you need to also start developing plans and trying to figure out What are things you can do to create more opportunities for better communication? And how can you put your people in a place where they're in the best place to succeed, right? A lot of what I do as a kind of first level manager is make sure that I have enough contact with my team and know my team well enough that I understand, what are they looking to learn? How excited are they about what they're doing now? What do they want to be doing? How engaged are they? What are they looking for in their career, right? And have all that context so that when we're looking at, let's say, figuring out what we're doing the next quarter, I can put them in the right place to work on stuff that's going to make them more excited, that's going to give them a great opportunity to learn about things that they care about, keep them engaged in the company, keep them engaged in their career, right? All that requires planning, so do it. At the end of the day, that all builds trust, and then trust builds relationships. So, reiterate, management is about relationships. Cool. So things are okay. We're communicating with our team. We're building trust. Things are going well. And then you have a week where, let's say, 2/3 of your team are on vacation the same week. There's some giant fire drill going on, and everything's going nuts. You start doing some of this again, and it seems fine at first, and it feels good at first, right? Like it feels good to be shipping commits and deploying code again. But at the end of the day, the next week comes up and you have like a bit of a hangover, right? You end up realizing that because you were doing the actual work at hand, right? So basically, I guess our next lesson of management is about not doing the work, right? If you're doing the little work of your team, then you're not doing your job of making sure that the team has what they need to get the work done, right? And I've certainly had the experience of, like, everybody who becomes a new manager goes through this of, like, you'll have the weeks where you slip and, like, no, I can just get this one commit in and, focus on that. And then you have, like, a hangover the next week, next week, and that since you were doing that instead of doing your actual job, you'll, hit Monday and realize, oh, wow, I have no idea how we're going to actually execute against what we want to get done big picture wise, and my team is now sitting around twiddling their thumbs because they have no idea what to do or what is needed from the company, right? Because I didn't do the work that I needed to do. So remember, it's about empowering people to get the work done, not doing the work yourself. Another fun game that comes up as a manager that I continually struggle with. So, real short story, I am a terrible actor. There's lots of reasons why I'm a terrible actor, but most of it comes down to I'm really bad at physically presenting an emotional state that is not actually my current emotional state. It seems like a core part of being an actor. It's not something I do well, but it's something that's also really important for a manager sometimes, right? Because inherently being a manager, you set the tone for the team. Especially, it's probably a bit more exaggerated if you're an in-person co-located team than something that's remote. But even in general, right? So let's say I have a really rough day at home, right? The dogs are going nuts. I have some personal stuff going on. I'm maybe not feeling super great. I come into the office and I'm short and I'm grumpy and just say everything's going to hell, right? That's not going to set up my team to do an awesome day of work, right? They're going to feed off that and either go down a negative path themselves or get distracted by hey, what's up with that? What did I do something wrong? So you have to be mindful of the tone that you're presenting to everybody else is going to impact the rest of your team. And it's going to be a bigger impact than when you're an individual contributor. Like I said, something I struggle with and it's something I'm not perfect about, but it's something you have to keep in mind. So we get that under control and things are again going well. We have our little happy bear here. And then things get hard again. You get a brick thrown at you, and things go poorly. And the one that tends to happen, at least the pattern that I've run into my career, is generally speaking, I've been lucky enough that when I started out as a manager, I had a really easy team, right? They were super engaged. They all wanted to work. There weren't really any major issues within the team. And things were, right, there was still work to do, but it was easy, right? But then, time goes on, and let's say somebody on the team starts checking out, right? They're technically doing their job, but they're not super engaged, kind of have a foul attitude every day. And at first you're like, well, I don't really know, right? Maybe they're just dealing with some personal stuff and it'll get better on its own. Maybe I did something that upset them and they haven't wanted to talk about it yet. There's a strong temptation to kind of just like wait it out and just see if it works itself out. But at the end of the day, you really can't let that happen for too long. Because the whole time that somebody isn't doing well on your team, it's having a huge impact on the rest of your team, right? And it can become a toxic cycle that just feeds and spirals into awfulness. So it's something that you have to address in a relatively timely manner. And the way you address it is talking, right? It's always something where you need to find the right balance and understand your people and understand your organization as far as like how direct to be, how much to push, how much to let it go. But at the end of the day, it's going to end in basically one of two options, right? On one hand, you talk, you figure out, you get to the core of the issue, things are happy, you keep going on together. Or you hit a fork in the road, and either they decide to leave or you have to decide to let them go. And this one sucks, right? Like having people leave your team, and even more so having to fire people, is not fun in any way, size, shape, or form. But it's way better than having having your entire team turn toxic. Additionally, most of the time when this happens, it's assuming that something like catastrophic hasn't happened. It usually basically comes down to people in life go through a certain path. And careers in their life isn't the right word, but journey? I don't know. Companies are weird. Companies have their own path, right? And when things are going well, those paths happen to coincide for a while. But sometimes they go in different directions, right? Companies maybe pivot, maybe they change the way they work, maybe they get bigger, maybe they get smaller. All that changes the experience of the people who work there, and certainly the people themselves change, right? They grow, they learn, and they may feel that they're at a place where they're not a good fit for the company anymore. And at that point, it's good when you can work it out and get to this place, but you still really want, like, at the end of the day, if you can't work it out, it's really important to realize that and then address it. So, lesson here is issues cannot be left unresolved. And we're in the home stretch, and I've been rambling for a while. But so I have a bit of a last thing to get into. And this is a weird one, but I was scrambling, and Rick and Morty's always good. But this section is going to basically be about everybody's problems are your problems, right? Because people are your problem, therefore it's that. And particularly, you have to be mindful and aware of what problems people might be encountering that you haven't encountered yourself or don't have to deal with personally. And there's two major dimensions where this tends to come up. One of them is inclusiveness, right? And diversity, right? Me being, a white dude who grew up in the suburbs in a relatively affluent area in the US, right? There's all entire categories of shit that I did not have to deal with as a human. And wasn't even aware until later in life that there is shit that other people have to deal with because of other intrinsic traits, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's religion, whether it's health issues, right? There are all kinds of dimensions about where we as a society and we as humans are still awful, and accordingly people have to deal with that. And you as a manager need to be aware of what experiences people likely have gone through and what options there are for making that better and not making your place awful for them to work in. So there's some great resources for that. Geek Feminism Wiki is a good, kind of just good overview, and one of the terms that is really helpful for understanding this overall is something called dimensionality. If you don't know what that is, this is a great place for trying to learn about that. Obviously, as the name implies, it focuses on a particular dimension of gender, but it has some general great stuff about learning about that. There's a wonderful conference that happens in Portland every year. It's a technical conference, but it has a fantastic people track that's evolved. And basically, by the nature of who have been involved in it, it has some really amazing content on understanding the challenges of different types of people have encountered and how to make it better for them, and how to understand what they're going through. And if you want something to actually act on it, as well as learn, there's a wonderful thing called Fun Club, where if you're somebody who is sitting in this room and is probably making silly internet money because computers are apparently valuable right now, you might have a little bit of money that you can throw at helping people out. Fun Club is basically a newsletter where they basically pick some kind of charity organization that's doing work to help people who are have been challenged in various ways, and basically share that. And the basic idea is you sign up and you're loosely committing to donate $100 to the charity that. So I would encourage you to check it out, and both in terms of acting on things as well as learning about different groups and whatnot. So learning about and being inclusive. This really does go beyond just don't be a jerk in the way that you think that being a jerk is a jerk. The other major dimension where this comes up is you're on the front lines of mental health. So there's all kinds of stuff going on here. Some things to throw out there is there's still a huge stigma around mental health, which is still insane. There's a line I'm going to steal. I don't know if Ed Finkler is here, but I'm going to steal a line from a talk he's probably going to give over today, or no, tomorrow. So imagine you're running into somebody who's wearing glasses, and they don't have their glasses that day. Would you ever say to them, just squint harder? Right? No, that's absurd, right? Like, because they have a biological problem going on that isn't going to get made better by trying harder. Telling somebody who has depression just to smile more, it's about as crazy, right? So like, there's a lot to learn there. And there's also if you're doing your job as a manager, you're likely going to be one of the few people in somebody's life where you have enough contact with that person, you have enough awareness of what's going on, at least at a surface level, that you're probably going to be able to pick up when something isn't going super well and can help guide them to help when they need it, right? Not to help them yourself, because that's something that it's like a doctor, right? If somebody's lost their arm and they're gushing blood, putting something on that to stop the bleeding is good, but fixing the problem, you need an actual doctor, right? Same kind of thing with mental health. So there's some great resources out there. Like I mentioned, so there's a guy, Ed Finkler, who gives a great talk on kind of generally about this larger and the issue of mental health in tech and how we haven't been great about dealing with it. I think it's at 1:30 tomorrow. I think it's called Stronger Than Fear. You should go check that out. It's fantastic. I originally learned about it at Open Source Bridge. He also participates in this project Prompt, which is great. Has some great resources about learning about stuff. Something else I learned about through that talk, and I actually went through about a month ago, is mental health first aid training. So this is a program that started in Australia a while ago. And the basic premise is, so with medical first aid, the basic idea is to actually train somebody to treat all the things that could go wrong with a human being, you literally need decades of schooling and experience, right? So we probably can't do that for everybody because, well, we just can't. But, and according to doctors, can't be everywhere. But there is probably some basic training that we can give people that maybe takes a day or two to help them understand, recognize when somebody needs help, how to stabilize them in the moment and guide them to the help that they need, right? And that's what kind of medical first aid is. Mental health first aid is the same kind of idea. Something that helps you, it's basically a day-long class where you get taught, where you learn and go through some exercises to understand what are some of the common forms of mental health problems that people go through. What are the characteristics of that, and what are the best kind of like in the moment responses to various conditions that people might have, as well as learning about what resources there are to guide them to get real help. It's fantastic. Often it's organized by your local health department. So I'm based in New York, and the New York Health Department has classes that are for free that you can go and take. If you go to the website, you can plug in your zip code and you'll find out what classes are available by you, but you can usually get it for free. Also, depending on where you are, a lot of times they'll do company trainings, which are pretty awesome. So strongly encourage you to check that out. So to reinforce, mental health, it's your problem. So with that, we're more or less done. So becoming a manager, it's tricky. You're going to fall down sometimes and get scared. But you'll get yourself back up and keep learning and keep trying new things. It's good. So with that, I wanted to throw out a few last resources that I found really helpful. Managertools.com is an incredible resource that they provide a ton of content out for free. So the way I originally learned about this is they have a podcast where they basically just publish like 20, 40-minute episodes on a very specific topic. But they have this thing on their website, this kind of like a screenshot of on the left, what they call the map of the universe, where if you have any kind of thing that you're looking for guidance on as a manager, and it gets really specific. It has like becoming the manager of an existing team, doing phone screens, interviewing, dealing with somebody who has attendance problems, dealing with people who have communication issues. And there's a huge amount of resources that you can kind of click through their map of the universe and get some really great guidance on. They also do conferences and like in-person trainings. I haven't actually gone through that yet, but if it's as good as the podcast stuff, it's going to be great. I'm probably going to try and do that sometime in the next year. Like I mentioned, the stuff from Rands is great for engineering-specific stuff. And the last bit kind of related to there is there's a Slack channel that Michael Loft started of kind of it's like a leadership channel for kind of like peers to talk about what they're going through and share what resources they find. It is kind of high volume, so it can be a little hard to keep up with, but it's pretty great. And signing up's easy. It's just like you send an email to somebody. I think it's a bit of a speed bump to keep like recruiters and jerks out. But strongly recommend joining that. And that's all I got. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or whatnot? I think we've got some time.
Just out of curiosity, do you have any experience with transitions from management back into coding or like the reverse?
That's a great question. So to repeat, the question was, do I have any experience dealing with transitions from management back into coding? Personally, I have not gone through that myself, but we have done that for people at Bitly. And it's something it's a good thing to keep in mind, right? So like, you may try management and find out that it's not for you. And it's good to keep in mind that you are not permanently locked into this track, and going back to engineering is an option. How well that particularly goes is going to depend a lot on your organization. I would say there is stigma might be strong, but there is a perception challenge around that, I think, within a lot of organizations. So I would generally recommend work with your boss and your manager and try and figure out the right path on that. But the big thing there is keep in mind that that's an option. Try it. That makes sense. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, do your man.
I was just wondering if you had any opinion or experience on actually trying to be more integrated, not as part of the team, but just amongst the team. You talked about an open door policy and trying to reserve time each week, but I mean, could that actually be accommodated or accomplished by being part of the team in a sense?
So the question, to repeat, was, so do I have opinions around being more integrated in the team and kind of maybe accomplishing certain things through that?
Yeah, like accomplishing the open door policy,
right?
Through that type of work.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess it depends on what flavor you mean of that. So one of the things I have learned is that doing a complete mix of, like, let's say trying to have half your time be doing literal coding and half your time being management stuff gets really rough, as much as I kind of loathe to reference him at this point. Paul Graham did have a good post years and years ago about kind of manager schedules versus developer schedules. And I find being 50-50 in that regard is usually not sustainable long term. That being said, there is a lot of value of obviously being involved in the work of your team. Like, for example, I still am pretty heavily involved in architecture planning and code review and stuff like that. As far as kind of replacing some of the like one-on-ones and stuff like that, I find that there are two things about one-on-ones that you don't get that are hard to replace. One is by having that kind of regular expected checkpoint. While it can go a bit too far in the other direction of people not raising stuff until then, it does give like a natural kind of thing of like, especially if you set the expectation with your reports of like, hey, we're going to be talking about stuff. Make sure you bring stuff to talk about. Like it's good to have that like mental checkpoint to like have that review. The other thing that I find one-on-ones can be really helpful for that are harder without that is having a very low friction environment to ask questions where they would be awkward to ask in a larger environment or to specifically ask time for, right? So like examples would be So we do a company all hands meeting every week, and maybe the CEO said something where one of the people on my team was like, "Whoa, that was a surprise. What's that about?" Right? So they don't necessarily want to like schedule a meeting about that. They also don't necessarily want to ask it in a group environment, but having that environment provides that. So at least that's my experience. But yeah, I would say you can't go too far, right? Like you don't want to be like completely removed from your team and have no idea what they're doing, right?
One thing I can add where you mentioned the 50-50, right? Like it all depends on you, what you want to do. Do you really want to become a leader and managing, right? Using that. So it's that goal, right? So there is a transition. There is always a transition to leave your own stuff, right? Then you created and then how are you gonna leave, right? You can do some stuff within half an hour, but the other team member might do a couple of days. That's comes from mentoring, right? So if you are in that, like, yeah, I want to manage, I want to become a leader, I want to help the team member to grow, then the mindset should be different, right? So it might take a long time, but it's okay. So you have to buy in from the business partners that, yeah, I will take like 2-3 days, right? Is that okay? Sometimes they will say no, so it depends on the severity of the project you're working on that. So that happens all the time, right? I transited like for 10 years I was coding. In the last 4 or 5 years I'm doing the team leader role, right? And I still do programming sometimes. 10% of that, right? So it all depends, right?
Yep. Yeah, I would definitely say the mentorship can be a good angle for that. The other angle, depending on the nature and size of your organization, sometimes there can be differentiated roles between being a technical leader and being a people leader, if that makes sense. So that might also be a gradated place for like your interests and skills and so on that you might want to look out for, or maybe depending on the nature of the organization you're in, try and create that role if that's something you think you're interested in.
So you mentioned like have a one-on-one with your team member.
Yep. Sure.
Every week, right? It's
Yep.
not too much because what's your opinion on that? Like from my side, like one-on-one per week, you sit together with your team, you talk to them every day. You have a hip check, you have an IM, you have so many different applications where you come. Why you still have to do one-on-one every week? Like for us, like like every alternate week or maybe once a month. That's how we perform, right?
So, I would say there's a certain amount. So the question was like basically why the frequency a week, and maybe is it necessary for it to be that frequent? There certainly are a lot of levers you can turn as far as like how frequently you meet, how long you meet for, how rigid you are about rescheduling and stuff like that. The week cadence I've found works really well, and I know a lot of people do because. A lot of it comes back to that, like creating that low friction but private environment to ask questions and communicate about things, right? So, like, if somebody had that question coming out of the company all hands meeting, they'll probably remember it the following Tuesday. They probably won't remember it in a month, right? Or care about it anymore in a month. So, like, monthly sounds a bit rough for me. Bi-weekly, I know people who do that, and it works. It's all figuring your thing. As far as like having all the other channels, I mean, some of it also depends on the size of your team, right? Like if you're managing 2 people, it's very different than if you're managing 8. I would actually say as your team gets larger, the one-on-ones actually get more important because this is that much harder to keep track of everything that's going on. And I would generally. Yeah, I would say it's preference, but I would certainly encourage at least trying the weekly thing and seeing what happens. The other thing that can be interesting that comes up is like when you get past the first week or 2, you can talk about like long-term career stuff and what are you doing, what's up. When you get like past that, like some interesting things can come up if we keep pushing as far as like, okay, we're still going to talk. What's up? So I usually schedule them for a half hour, 45 minutes. But we don't always use that time, right? So if there's a week where there isn't that much to talk about, it might just be 15, 20 minutes, right? But I usually schedule them for about half an hour. That one, I think there's a lot more room to kind of play around with what works for you and your team. we'll usually play it by ear. I usually try and have a room scheduled for us. Again, it's having the relatively private environment makes it a lot easier to ask potentially awkward questions or have certain conversations. That being said, like sometimes, like let's say it's a relatively light week and like all our conference room got stolen for an interview and whatnot. I might say to somebody like, "Hey, would you want to go get some coffee?" Like if you want to have like if there's something you want to talk about that is more sensitive, we can find time to make the room. Like I always make sure that that's still an option for them. But we'll sometimes just do like a walking kind of thing, or like just go to a more public space. Yep.
You're asking like why one-on-one, why not this chat, why not? I think something that you have said.
There is a why. It's like why one-on-one once a week. You do need one-on-one definitely, right?
Yep.
Once a week is sometimes become too much, right? When you're sitting with your team members, right, and as class as a principal, you can proceed.
I think what I was going to add is there is one thing I think you're not saying, but it's like you're implying you're supposed to point out, and that's like with HipChat and all these other things, right? Like you're distracted by a million things. You're on HipChat, you're on email, you're on some documentation system. You're probably in a meeting with somebody trying to talk to you on HipChat, and it's being written down, right? So that
Right.
in person, the laptops are away. There's no distractions. The person doesn't feel like they're bothering you. They're going to be more open, and they know that like that conversation is going to happen, and then it's going to disappear. There isn't like I asked my boss something that I'm not sure if I should have been asking in the first place.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's a different context. It's a different setting.
So it all depends on your culture, right? Culture of the company is very important. So going back on that, you have an open culture where you can knock the door of CEO and talk. You have or not, right? That all depends on that, right? My culture is different than anybody else, right? Where I work from home, right? And we have an open culture. I really cannot CEO. People just decide over there, right? Leaders sit with us, right? And senior VP, they sit with us, right? So when I'm managing, right, the team members, I know them very well, right? So why I have to go for one-on-one. Now, going back to the question, what do you want to talk in one-on-one? Really, work? A leader should not talk about work in one-on-one because your part should know what they are working on all the time. We should talk totally separate. That's the thing, like what you talk in one-on-one.
Yep.
Personal thing, yeah. What else, right? Like, what is there is question which I have is who do you talk in your one-on-one?
Yeah, so it really will vary. So it'll depend on what's on kind of top of mind for the person. Sometimes. So I will say sometimes I would generally agree. So you had said that you generally encourage not talking about work, but focus on personal stuff or so on. There are a few exceptions I would say to that I'll do. So yeah, I would agree. It's not a ton of like I might have like as an icebreaker, like hey, what's up? How's project ever going? But like that's not the focus. There are some situations where, let's say somebody is taking more of a lead role, or they're trying to work through a particular problem. Right, we might get into the details on that and talk through that. For some of the more junior people on my team, like we don't have other stuff to talk about, we might go through like an architecture exercise or like take it as like, well, we have this time on our calendar, let's pretend architect is a system that we don't need, but like go through the exercise to educate. There'll be a lot of kind of career path type stuff that comes up. There'll be a lot of organizational questions, right? This will be a lot of times be a place for like, I know so-and-so left, what was that about, right? Like those kind of conversations. Raising that, like that's a place to talk about, like, hey, what do you want to be working on? What are you happy about? What are you not? That's a lot of what I think we're going to talk about. So to repeat, the question was, what's the biggest roadblock I've run into on team efficiency? It's an interesting question. I think a lot of it's basically been figuring out how to, I guess again, to one of the more classic things that actually now I think about it, I need to add as a section in this, is figuring out how to remove myself as a bottleneck and how to delegate better, and how to figure out, to create the right kind of structures and process to empower people to get stuff done on their own and to remove me from the process. It's an internal battle for all managers, I think, but I would say often yes. Yep. Cool. So I think I probably got time for one more.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Since when you have such vast experience in something, and you know you can sit down and just and be done with something, how do you ever have this situation when you see somebody struggling, or you see somebody that's like taking a long time, or you ever have that why isn't Johnny coding, or why like just this, come on man.
Yep. So the question is basically, do I ever get frustrated around people taking too long to do something that I can knock out in 5 minutes? Yes. It's actually something that has gotten easier for me the longer I've been doing management, the more I've become like full-time management. And a lot of it also depends on the specific situation. I definitely do try and do a lot of situations that, I forget who, but somebody had kind of brought up of like intentionally putting somebody on a project that I know will take them, say, an order of magnitude longer than me or somebody who's more experienced will, but make sure that it's a project where like A, we can afford that time hit, and B, I know it's going to be an awesome learning experience for that person, right? So like that's the easy case of that, right? Because you're going in expecting it. When it happens more unexpectedly, it can be frustrating, but it's a lot of just like, for me, the biggest thing is as long as the person going through it is learning and they're not making the literal same mistakes over and over again, I can deal with a lot. When they're not learning and when they are hitting the same mistake over and over and over again, that's when alarm bells start going off and something more severe needs to happen.
The frustrating part for me is when it's not a mentoring or learning capacity issue. Like we've already know that the capacity is there.
Yeah.
It's just like the efficiency of the process that person is choosing at that time is not. It's just not producing results. So I guess that's just a general thing as a manager you need to address, and I work on that. But
yeah, I mean the other thing that I've tried to I think it's that we try to do really hard, but can be different in different organizations, is when we are doing planning, we very much look to get the initial estimates and kind of time framing from the engineers who are going to be doing the work themselves, and then also add modifiers on top of that, knowing their past performance. Granted, we do it in a more hand-wavy way than I'm suggesting or implying, but an important thing that comes out of that is it much more comes from a place of holding people accountable to their own standards and what they think they can accomplish, as opposed to imposing that on them and adjusting accordingly, right? So if they come back and have an estimate that you think is nuts, that's an easy conversation to have, right? Like, but if you just hand somebody like, well, I think it'll take you 2 weeks to do this, do it, and then it doesn't take 2 weeks, right? Like that's a much more difficult conversation, right? Cool. So I think we're out of time. We're moving. Cool. One more. Yeah. Yeah, I would add the caveat of humans are complicated and it's not always quite that simple. But yes, that's a very good place to start. Cool. All right, so I think that's all the time we had. But thank you for listening, and I'll be around and always happy to talk for the rest of the conference. So thank you.